Welcome back to the Training Model Podcast. We are here with another episode, and today we will be discussing the rib cage. I'm going to move the technical chat to the start today. We will be discussing the rib cage because we are in week 3 of the movement mentorship. So this is intake 5 that I'm currently in. It's my flagship product, my flagship mentorship. And we are rolling into some of the deeper stuff. So the way that the mentorship is set up is there's pre-learning at the start. The pre-learning is all the base principles that all of the ideas, all the application are then built on top of. The reason that it is in pre-learning format is so that people can sort of consume it, but then they can also go back to it and re-reference it whenever they need to. We chatted about some of the principles last week in last week's episode. So if you do want to check that out, you can go back and check that out. But we're now in week 3 of the live calls, which is the way that I frame it to coaches that are coming in is week 1 and 2, shoulder and hip. Not that they're surface level, but hopefully we're starting some of the detailed chats in areas that coaches have an understanding of, and they're constantly coaching around and helping people with things like shoulder position, rib cage and shoulder position. I use a lot of reaches, so learning about reaches and applying reaches in the earlier weeks. Then when we get to the hip stuff, we start to learn about how pelvic position and lumbar spine, so sagittal plane, anterior and posterior tilting, can have a big influence on hip range of motion, but also performance and force production and all of that sort of stuff. So we start the mentorship in the first 2 weeks in those central ideas before we get into week 3 and 4. And week 3 and 4 is without a doubt a layer deeper. Week 3 is the rib cage and breathing as the lens to understand the rib cage. And ultimately, it's more than just the rib cage, it's axial skeleton. So when we say axial skeleton, or when you hear that term, you're basically talking about the rib cage, the spine, and the skull or the head. So it's the central column of the human system. So week 3 is discussing rib cage, axial skeleton, using breathing as the lens to understand that. And the reason that we use breathing as the lens is because breathing has kind of like a broad sweeping application to the axial skeleton. Obviously, respiration is constantly happening. There's a lot of very specific things that we're looking for when using breath and using respiration to manage pressure internally. And when we discuss the axial skeleton in its application to lifting, it is basically pressure management. That is the biggest thing. So we need to understand how pressure is managed above and below the level of the diaphragm. So in the thoracic cavity and then in the abdominal cavity, how that then may impact down in the pelvic bowl and the pelvic floor. And then ultimately learning how to shift and manage pressure internally for different outcomes in the gym. So breathing is a huge lens, and that there's a reason that it is a common discussion point within the industry for people in the circles that you might enjoy learning from, is because it is a quite a unique function that the human has evolved to learn to use both consciously and subconsciously. One of the key things around that is that we can override subconscious breathing strategies. So more often than not, breathing is subconscious. It's just happening. We're not thinking about it and all of that. But we have developed the opportunity through evolution to be able to control breath rate and control both carbon dioxide and oxygen coming in and out of the system, control the rate of our breathing, the depth of our breathing. We can slow it down, we can speed it up. And these breathing strategies have huge implications to the central nervous system. And when you begin to understand the central nervous system and start to learn that it is a reactive system, that's one of the key principles, is that the nervous system is reactive. Muscle tension is part of that. Muscle tension is reactive. We use breath as an input and breath rate, breath depth as an input into the nervous system to modulate the outputs that it has. A very simple way that you could play around with this and think about this is the idea of, like, when you're stressed, it's very common for people to just say, hey, just take a breath, man. Slow down, just take a breath. Just fucking, mate, just exhale. calm down. That is just like the most simple way to think how breathing can influence the system. When you are stressed, when you are sympathetic, when you are jacked up and nervous and anxious and all of these sort of things, that has systemic influence at the nervous system, which then has systemic influence at all of the systems of all of the subsystems of the human. So learning to manage CNS drive, sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, through the portal that is breathing, through management of breathing, has huge, broad, sweeping application to a lot of people all the time. And it is something that once you learn to use and manage, you can really have big impact, not just in just how people are feeling and their management strategies of external stresses and things like that might impact their training, but also physically, when you calm the system down, when you increase parasympathetic tone in the system, how that has an impact systemically at all of the muscle tension, all of the joint positions, all of the sort of range of motion expressions. It can modify pain in very simple, acute ways. It's definitely not a chronic thing, but it can definitely open windows for better training expression. So learning to use breath, learning to use respiration, not just physically as pressure management strategies, but also systemically as central nervous system sort of modulation, can be really, really helpful. So that's what we dive into in week 3, is like learning some of the functional things that need to happen to manage pressure internally. And when we think about internal pressure management, it really is centered around the diaphragm and diaphragm action. And if you're following along these podcasts, hopefully you're starting to learn some of these reactive strategies of muscle tension. Diaphragm action is not completely dependent, but heavily dependent on the position that the bones are in. And if we position the skeleton, specifically the axial skeleton, in a non-favorable position, this would look like a rib flare. This would look like a forward transition of mass. This would look like an extension of the trunk. This would look like an anterior tilt. If we position the skeleton towards that direction, a forward shift of center of mass is the central idea there. We actually can minimize the ability for the thoracic diaphragm to descend within the abdominal cavity, which can then massively change the way in which we shift pressure, and then also change the way that all of the surrounding musculature tension is a response to that position as well. So learning to shift back, it's a central part of my sort of coaching, is learning to shift back, learning to get the rib cage to descend and sort of like retract and internally rotate with a good exhale. Learning to share that tension around abs and obliques is another really big thing. We don't really want a dominant strategy in either of those. We kind of want to share tension around the trunk, across obliques, across the abdominals, the rectus abdominals, but also potentially the TVA. TVA gets a little bit tricky to sort of differentiate between what's going on. I just like to think about obliques and abs for that case, because you can feel them. Clients can point to them and actually palpate them a lot easier. So learning to position the skeleton, the axial skeleton more specifically, in a position that promotes a bit more diaphragm descension through the inhale is really, really helpful. And then this is ultimately this leads into the rabbit hole that is breathing as an intervention and breathing drills as an intervention. And then you get to different models where people talk about inhalation and exhalation sort of skeleton positions. You talk about wide and narrow ISAs if you follow someone like a Bill Hartman. These are all definitely deeper applications and deeper ways to think about this sort of stuff. But there's definitely some just general principles around the rib cage that if most coaches understood, they would improve their client outcomes without a doubt. So today we're going to chat in the podcast about what some of those central ideas around the rib cage are, and how you might best use them or think about them when you're coaching clients. So the first one is obviously like this sagittal plane forward and backwards shift. So this bilateral shift forward and this bilateral shift backwards in space. And we've chatted about this a lot in the podcast, so I'd recommend going back to some of the other. Actually, one thing I did do is I set up a playlist on the YouTube channel, because I'm no longer using like podcast terminology in the titles, I guess. I've kind of just deleted that. And it seems to be working. Like the The views have definitely been increasing in the last, like I'm looking at it right now. Actually, look, we can go to fucking OBS. How was the first? Oh, I've got a funny story about OBS. I was using OBS in the mentorship call, in the Q&A call, and it's just a different setup and all of that. And I was recording and I didn't know, but I was recording my blank screen with me in the corner. And on the blank screen, I had my notes section that has all of my fucking passwords, all of my login details for a whole bunch of different softwares that I use for work and all of that. And one of the guys, Vinay, was like, "Hey man, I could see all your Stripe keys and everything." And I actually felt so embarrassed. It was only up there for a little bit, and I politely asked no one steal my shit, but I had to go back and edit it. But that was a funny thing. I'm still learning all of this software, but we are now looking at the YouTube channel. Because this is a visual podcast. If you're following along, 411 subs, we love that, but that is still bogus. We need to get that number up. So if you're new here, please subscribe, drop an algorithm boosting comment. But you will notice that I have dropped the episode dot blah blah blah. I've also changed my thumbnails from Angus Bradley ripping into me. Since doing that, views have definitely increased as well, which is great. So I'm making some subtle changes, but what that means is that it's a bit more difficult to go back and just watch the previous podcast. So I've created a little podcast, fucking, what is it? Like a library, I guess. You can just click on that and it will take you to the podcast. So if you do want to go through or if you're listening audio, obviously they're all there, but yeah, that is one thing to think about if you do want to go back to some of these other topics and other things that I have discussed. Just putting my phone on Do Not Disturb. So obviously, we've chatted heavily about shifting center of mass. Center of mass is the central principle of human movement. You can't get away from it. Once you understand center of mass and look through that lens, you just see it everywhere. Foot pressure is center of mass. Axial skeleton position is center of mass. A lot of your quote unquote orientational shifting strategies are center of mass strategies. Forward shifting of the rib cage is center of mass, will drift forward. Anterior and posterior pelvic tilt is generally going to be heavily tied to center of mass position in space. Reaching is center of mass. Like, so much of the application of my ideas is just centers around center of mass. And once you learn center of mass and you start to pick up content around other people that promote these ideas and talk about these ideas, it's kind of like removing the veil of some of the things that they discuss and some of the ideas and the terminology they use. It kind of just always centers back to center of mass. So this sagittal plane center of mass is a huge thing to pick up when coaching clients and learning to observe sagittal plane center of mass. So learning and observing what happens when people fatigue. Generally, you're going to see a forward shift. What happens when people lose balance? Generally, you're going to see a forward shift or a backward shift. People with like hip shifting and dominant on one side. So if you use like a shitty narrative, like a left AIC pattern in the PRI world, if you view that from a center of mass idea, that is simply that they're just loaded on the right side. How they got over there might be slightly different to somebody else, but they're on the right leg. So the first thing, before you start going through all these crazy little fucking tips and tricks that PRI and people that are influenced by that will tell you about certain muscles and reactive tension and all of that sort of stuff. If you just think, well, if they're on the right leg, if they're always shifting to the right leg, what do I need to do to get them to balance and shift better onto the left leg? So that would look like left internal rotation on that side, left side compression, potentially left heel, left, all sorts of things on that left side. If you just view it from center of mass, it's like, I need to favor more of these things on the left-hand side, and that should allow the center of mass to maintain its balance a little bit more. So again, center of mass is this massive thing, but when it comes to rib cage specifically, if we think about center of mass as a continuum, if you push it forward, initially it will kind of just look like rib cage will float forward. You might present with an anterior tilt. It might just look like the pelvis drifts forward. So it doesn't anteriorly tilt, it just kind of pushes forward in space. But we start to see this axial skeleton move forward in space. That will be the initial shift of center of mass. Once you sort of get past that first 30 to 40% of the way before you fall over, you'll start to see a whole bunch of things come in. Foot pressure is going to shift aggressively to the front of the foot, forefoot, potentially toes, losing heel pressure. That means that the tibia has gone forward in space. You'll probably see a bunch of like lumbar extension, maybe like thoracolumbar junction. So the base of the rib cage start to really push forward when you really take center of mass forward. You'll start to see these counter movements of the head going up into extension to counterbalance the forward shift. You'll start to see the arms move backwards in space. You'll start to see retraction, downward rotation of the scapula to counterbalance and deliver the arms back. That is that huge forward shift that comes in. Obviously, we've just taken it to the extreme. But if we think about that diaphragm is reactive to bone position, if we flare the ribs, if we drive extension in the system, we're really going to minimize the amount that diaphragm can descend down. And then also we're going to minimize how well that pelvic floor is positioned to manage that pressure as it comes down the canister. So kicking the system forward isn't productive. Conversely, the initial part of sagittal plane shifting center of mass back will look like a stack to most people. It's going to look like the ribs come down. It's going to look like the pelvis tucks underneath. We start to see the canister. We start to see a shift back in heel pressure. We start to get off the toes and back towards like a midfoot, maybe like a heely midfoot connection. That's that initial shift back. The head will come back down to quote unquote neutral. The arms will swing back down by our side. But then if we aggressively shift center of mass back, we start to see all of these counter positions to manage that mass that continues to move backwards. This is where we'll start to lose forefoot pressure and we'll start to balance. This would look like a Mike Israetel RDL. We literally are like hanging on the back of the heels. We don't have any midfoot, no forefoot pressure. There's no real ability to maintain and push down into the ground there because we're hanging on the back of the heels and we're kind of just like balancing ourselves behind our center, our base of support. You'll start to see aggressive anterior compression of the rib cage. The pump handle will pull down, but it will get to a point where it's so far down that eventually the upper back just rounds and we get what is called spinal flexion. It's a very aggressive rectus abdominis strategy that might come in. You'll also see the head pull down. You'll see the arms start to swing forward in space to counterbalance that shifted back center of mass. But if we think about sort of that midpoint, some people need a little bit more extension, especially in the upper back, and to push some of the rib cage forward, especially if they've got like that aggressively compressed anterior chest wall. So the pump handles pulled down, very rectus dominant strategy. We actually need to learn to expand the front side of their rib cage a little bit potentially, and feeding some extension in the upper body can be helpful for that. Sagittal plane pelvis is really important to control and manage and set up for different positions and different outcomes. But if we think about specifically the diaphragm, what we're looking for is we're actually looking for when we exhale, that the exhale internally rotates the rib cage. So that would look like the infrasternal angle, the false ribs, the lower rib cage pulling in laterally, and the sternum, the space between the thoracic spine and the sternum starting to close in when we exhale. Hopefully all of that stuff happens without flexing the system, without shrugging, not so much shrugging, but without rolling the shoulders over the top and without flexing and crunching down. The easiest way to think about this is losing height. What we're looking for is ultimately just the stack in order to align the thoracic diaphragm with the pelvic diaphragm and then start to get that internal pressure management strategy starting to pump. That's what we're looking for when it gets to the rib cage. And I think that's probably the first like key principle when thinking about the rib cage is simply just thinking that if I want to manage internal pressure better, most people need to, especially for high performance lifts, heavy lifting, and even more so in not just the heavy lifting world, but just joint range of motion and all of that. A lot of it centers around finding a stack, repositioning the rib cage into a position that allows you to get that internal pressure management working in your favor. Learning to get a nice exhale so that we can set the diaphragm up nice and high in the thoracic cavity and then pulling it down with an inhale, not sacrificing position when we inhale or exhale, trying to like hold your, I kind of cue it as like hold your shape, don't lose your shape. When we both inhale and exhale, hold your position and just let this internal pressure management happen. That's kind of like the first key principle is understanding that finding that stack and allowing that diaphragm to elevate in the thoracic cavity when we exhale and allowing that thing to start to pump down, we should start to see the rib cage begin to move. A lot of people are navigating life with a very stiff rib cage. A lot of that is just mass is pushed into a direction, and part of that management of that mass in that direction, let's just say forward, is a bunch of accessory tension that just holds our shape, holds our position, and manages that mass in that more like forward position. That stiffens up the rib cage. That means that the rib cage kind of loses its ability to compress and expand, not just through breath cycles, but when we're looking to move into positions and allow relative motion of the scapula around the rib cage, or relative motion around the hips and all of that sort of stuff. Like if we're fixed in a position and we've got a bunch of tension holding us in that position, it can be very, very counterproductive to a lot of our outcomes. So that's kind of the first thing, is just learning that what the stack is, what that position looks like, how to coach and cue that. But then also, once we start to pump the diaphragm within that system and using a bunch of different breathing drills, which if you want content on that, I've got some on my channel, but you can always leave a comment, and I'm sure to have some breathing drill app examples that I could post up here on YouTube. But learning the different breathing drills, the different positional breathing drills, and how they sort of bias certain expansions and compressions in different areas of the trunk can be really, really helpful. But it all centers around finding the stack, pumping that thoracic diaphragm, managing pressure internally, and then hopefully starting to see the rib cage regain some of that dynamic movement. Seeing the false rib start to change shape when we inhale and exhale, seeing that lateral expansion and compression, seeing that anterior expansion and compression happening when we roll through those processes. So that's one of the main principles that we discuss. And then obviously the application to that is all the different coaching strategies. We go through a case study with a client that's had a lot of success with this stuff. And the next principle around this rib cage, this breathing cycle, all of this sort of stuff, is then learning that different positions that we can have the trunk in can bias sort of opening in different areas. And I think the easiest way to think about this, it can sound very confusing, but I think the easiest way to think about sort of opening up different areas of the rib cage is if we think about gravity's impact on just the internal organs and the internal structures, setting up gravity in different positions, which would look like us changing our trunk orientation in space, can use gravity to our advantage. So a classic one would be like a prone breathing drill, like a rock back. So you're face down, elbows on the floor. Gravity is obviously pulling everything forward in terms of our trunk space, which means that we probably are going to have a better opportunity to open up the backside. If all the pressure and everything's moving forward and down, we're probably going to open up that backside a little bit more, which is fantastic. If you go to like a supine drill, so you're laying on your back this time, obviously now gravity is pulling everything in the inside, pulling it down. So we're probably going to have a better opportunity to see and expand the front side of our body a little bit more, because gravity is pulling everything down to the backside. We're also constrained by the ground, obviously, which means we're probably just going to see and witness some more of that anterior expansion stuff, that lateral expansion stuff with being in a supine position. You also get like inverted positions, which I don't use a lot of, so we don't talk about it a lot, but someone like a Zach Couples uses a lot of like inverted positions. If you think about gravity, what is it doing? It's flipping the system on its head. So all of a sudden gravity is pulling everything down, and we might actually be able to get a little bit more sort of backside expansion, lower backside expansion, but also potentially using gravity to open up the upper half of the rib cage as well. So we're just playing around with different positions and learning how different reaches can manage. So like, we had a really good question from Ryan come through the chat, which would be like, how can I manage this with different reaches? And we kind of just use a right arm reach. So like if you reach your right arm down to the ground and don't go aggressive with it, but just a little bit of like a long right arm down to the ground, you'll notice that your trunk turns to the right and sort of laterally flexes to the right, and that's going to compress that right side, which means we're probably going to have a better opportunity to open that left side. If we go like a forward reach, right arm reach, it's going to turn the trunk to the left. So that can be really helpful when people seem to twist to the right all of the time, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that might be presenting, but a lot of people do have that sort of twist and rotation to the right hand side. So learning to reach with the right arm turns us to the left hand side. You could also do the same with like an overhead reach. Obviously, an overhead reach is going to promote a bit more upward rotation, a bit more elevation of the scap, which can be helpful for certain people. But if I reach my arm all the way up overhead, all of a sudden now my left side is crunching down. So we can manage our reaches and where we're directing openness in the rib cage just by, if we understand the principles of how these movements change axial skeleton position in space, that is where the utility lives. So that's what we're discussing in week 3. Obviously, it's a 90-minute call. Each of the lecture calls are 90 minutes. There's a lot more to that, but we're really starting to get into some of the deeper stuff in terms of my mentorship. Next week, we go to gait cycle as the lens for the appendicular skeleton. So we chatted today about the axial skeleton. So next week, we'll chat a little bit about the appendicular skeleton. So the appendicular skeletons, the arms and the legs, some people call them upper and lower extremities. It's scap-thoracic connection, and then obviously distal is the arm feeding into that. At the lower extremity, it's SI joint, and the distal is the feet coming into that. I kind of bypass a lot of my education bypasses the SI joint to a degree. We're really just thinking about center of mass positioning and also lumbar influence on pelvis moving as a unit. I think is a little bit more useful for most people where they're at with their understanding. And I think even just use case is just managing lumbar spine, managing rib cage and pelvis connection rather than thinking too detailed around the SI joint. Maybe we can chat about that in another, maybe that might be next week. We can chat about the SI joint and why I'm not a massive fan of some of the narratives around the SI joint. But yeah, that will be next week. But I'm loving the mentorship. I'm updating slides weekly. Well, I'm a week ahead, but I'm updating the slides throughout this intake as I get ready to. Well, it's obviously launched intake 6, which the information is down below. But I think I said this last week, but I really do believe that I've built something that can be really impactful to people and coaches to learn this stuff. And the feedback is always really positive, but even just in the calls every week, and I'm asking each of the coaches, like, how's the application going? And like, what are we learning? And what are we problem solving through with clients? And always a lot of people's their own training as well, but a lot of early wins with some of this stuff, which more often than not, it does happen. Some of these things are, once you learn them, it's like, holy shit, this could help so many people. But the feedback is always really positive, and I just know that I'm on the right path here with this mentorship. And even past students have gone through it, have always jumped back in and into my DMs or book one-on-one mentoring calls or any of that sort of stuff. But the feedback is always really, really positive. So I'm keen to elevate this again and to push this a little further. A quick update on, but yeah, before I get the quick update on, if you are interested, the movement mentorship, it kicks off. The next intake will be kicking off in May. So we're a couple of months out, so I'm not going to go too heavy on the marketing sort of things, but there's early bird is open currently. It will be one of the main links down below. If you do want to learn more about it, that's another thing that I need to update though, is the landing page. But if you're checking in every week on the podcast and in the content, you'll know what's coming. So some of the landing page might be a little outdated, just it's not a high priority right now. But yeah, always happy to help with questions. If you've got questions on anything, you can drop them down below in the comment section here on YouTube, but you can also drop them just in my DMs or however you need to contact me. I'm happy to chat around any of this sort of stuff, and also questions around which services might be best for different people. But that is the first thing that is the technical chat completed and the mentorship. The next thing I do want to chat about though is I'm building a foundations movement course. I've set up the Discord for this. One Playground actually, so that private course that I'm running with One Playground, that started this week. They've got their version of the pre-learning modules because I just love that structure, but they've got a slightly different sort of lead into the content because a lot of those people just don't know who I am and what I'm about. So I can't just dive into some of the deep stuff. I'm sure we'll get there, especially with this, probably the second workshop with them. But that is the first group that I've got in the Discord. So I'm fumbling my way in there. I'm adding roles to people, and I definitely need to automate role. If anyone has a good way to automate the role assignment process, so it's not a manual task for me. yeah, I need a way in which I can do that. I think that's going to be a hurdle for me, and I need to learn. There are softwares apparently that can do it. I don't want to pay for more fucking software. Holy shit. Everyone's telling me now to get Claude AI. Fuck ChatGPT off. I'm sick of ChatGPT being so positive. That's one thing I am sick of. For those who are new here, we are now officially in the rambling, ranting stuff at the end. But everyone's telling me to use Claude now, so I'm thinking about switching over to that. Claude bots apparently are very easy to set up. I would love to set up some automation things. I think I need to do an AI course or something. Although Ethan tells me I don't, I can just learn it. He learned it from Instagram, believe it or not. I know I can do it. I just got to spend the time to do it. But and I'm going to get left behind, as everybody nocebos everyone into. If you're not in the AI world, you're getting left behind daily. But that is another thing I want to do. But the Discord is set up. The overall structure of the Discord is set up, and the first group's in there. But the Movement Mentorship Foundation course is coming. My goal is to have that out about a month prior to the Intake 6 sort of end of early bird. So it's probably going to be like mid to late-ish April that it will come out. It's going to be pretty cheap. I've been umming and ahhing between like a $300 price point or going lower to like a $99 price point. So probably what I will do is maybe like the first 100, I'll do it really cheap. But I do want to have it a little bit more expensive. Like I don't want it to just be like bottom end. It may as well just be free at that point. I do want there to be some hurdle requirement to get in there, get in the Discord, get support from me. It can't just be open-ended. So that is coming. And the goal with the Movement Foundations course is to simplify all of the ideas to just their base. They're fundamentally just like base ideas. Obviously, there should be some complexity in there, and there will be some complexity in there, but I think a lot of people would get more, just even out of content, if they just like even just simply something as simple as like coupled actions of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, and just learning how dorsiflexion internally rotates the tibia. Like that is just such a base thing that once you learn, it's like, oh, that's what happens. So if the foot flattens, if force moves through the foot and flattens the foot, more than likely that is going to bring in a tibial internal rotation. Like just learning that is a big thing. So it's going to be like just base ideas. One of them, so I've recorded 3 of them already. One of them's foot and the ankle, and tying in just some entry-level foot pressure stuff. One of them's rib cage and scapula, and just tying in some of that rib cage influencing scapular positions. And one of them is pelvis and spine, and just learning about how pelvic position changes alongside spine, and they're generally going to be coupled together. Those are the 3 that I've filmed. But other ones that I have got on my list to film would be like rib cage actions, like learning just the base stuff around the rib cage. That's going to be one. Hinging and squatting. And the way I frame them being like the big rock strategy. So if anybody's ever purchased my all got for free, because it's a free thing right now, which is my squat and deadlift program, learning around the big rocks of hinging and squatting. So obviously I use the powerlifting lens a lot with that, but just learning that foundational stuff of like big rock strategy for hinges and squats, and big rock coaching strategy for any of your squat technique. A lot of that is balance, which is your foot pressure stuff, and bracing position, which is your axial skeleton position stuff. But obviously hinges are slightly different because they're a bit more extension dominant, where squatting is a little bit more just like vertical translation. I think we chatted about this last week, but there are some nuance to that. So that will be another one that I want to have in there. There's going to be some very entry-level programming ideas, some programming principles that are in there as well. I'm going to re-record that. And ultimately, like, it's just going to be like a package. It's probably going to be like 6-7 hours worth of content, like an entry-level package. Because I get a lot of people that ask me, like, I love your content, but I get lost in certain things, and what can I do to learn like some of the foundational things? And that's what that is in there for. So that is coming in the next few weeks. It's one of my big projects at the moment. The other thing, the final thing that I do want to chat about today is the technique review. Let's go back to Shouts out to John Ditloff for letting me do a technique review. We ticked over 200 views though, which is really, really awesome. I'll mute it. But I did this technique review, which I think worked pretty well. He sent me a bunch of training videos. I just chatted about some of these ideas. So if you haven't checked out the technique review, definitely check that out. It's one of my higher performing videos on my new channel. So that's pretty cool. So there'll be more of this sort of stuff to come. If you do want a technique review, just send me a bunch of your videos on Instagram and tell me what you're struggling or what you're looking for to improve with. I'd be more than happy to help you out. What I will say to that matter, though, is it is not for rehab. Obviously, I help with rehab with one-on-one clients, but it is not, hey, man, my back hurts, like I've got whatever. I've been told I've got X, Y, and Z. What should I be doing? Like, it's not that. That's not what it's for. It's kind of like, hey, can you just check out my squat technique, deadlift technique, bench technique, maybe some accessories, or I feel myself doing this. How can I improve that? Or whatever it needs to be, like more performance end of the spectrum rather than like pain management. It's not anyone that sends me the pain related stuff. I'm just going to politely say, look, man, it's not the right thing for you. If you want to book a one-on-one call, I'm happy to help you with that, because pain management, this is definitely going to be a topic for another podcast one of these days, but pain management, you can't have a biomechanical lens only. Like it's not enough. Obviously changing biomechanics, this is definitely going to be, let's just run through it very, very quickly. Obviously, changing biomechanics, changing how tension is shared across structures, whether it's focal load that's overloading something or a distribute sort of like dispersed load. Let's just use the hip, focal load into like one structure versus like a dispersed tension strategy around multiple structures. Obviously, learning biomechanical stuff can help you do that. And there will be pain presentations. There will be people in pain. That is all you need to do. It is simply just learning to manage tension better, manage load, direct load better around a joint. There's always that category of people, and you can't get away from that. But pain as an experience lives within what I call the subjective world. In fact, everything lives within the subjective world, but pain is like 1 + 1 = 2. Like it is such a subjective experience that you can't just go through the objective lens to fix and manage all pain. If all of your pain management strategies are simply just biomechanical things, you are stuck ultimately in the 1960s and 70s of the understanding of the human system. Like it is just not that anymore. So it's not a pain. I'm not there to fix people's pain. In fact, I'm not anywhere here to fix people's pain. What I'm here for and what I educate around is helping people, well, ultimately coaches, better understand movement expression. That is what my tagline. I help you teach movement better. At the end of the day, any coach, any allied health profession, any of that, the vessel that we use to progress people, regardless of the context, is movement. That is what we do. We learn a movement strategy and then we load the movement strategy, and eventually it looks like training. It gets through the skill development phase and eventually gets to the training end, and we just start to overload the system, progress the system, and get the objective training outcomes. That vessel is used in our world through movement. If you don't understand the movement stuff, I really do believe you don't actually understand your job. Like that's as simple as it can be said. If you don't understand some of the things that I'm talking, like just simply like an anterior tilt and a posterior pelvic tilt, like if you don't understand what those two things are and how they impact the hip and how they impact the spine and how they impact the rib cage, it's going to be very difficult for you to become a productive coach. So what I teach is movement. I have people in there that are allied health, that are physios, because they work in more of the pain world, more of the entry point to training and recapturing positions and all of that. It's a big application there. It's also a big application to movement in terms of performance outcomes, hypertrophy, tensioning certain muscles, tensioning or offloading certain muscles, learning to use orientations and some of these things to manage our position and tension better. It's obviously huge in the strength world, powerlifting world. All of that stuff, though, the underbed to all of it is movement, obviously. obviously. It's the objective movement strategy that the human is using. But when we zoom out of just that biomechanical lens and we start to actually observe what the human is going through, the subjective experience that all of that is living within, just thinking that just simply changing biomechanical things for pain, it's not the right thing. So I'm definitely on a rant. This is probably definitely a topic for another podcast. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop there. If you're still here, I appreciate you. Drop a comment, subscribe if you're new here. Share it with a friend. That would help me too. A couple of things, just if you want to learn more from me, obviously Movement Mentorship Intake 6 is open, getting a big upgrade. Intake 5 is currently getting the upgrade as I build it out, but Intake 6 is launching with the upgrades. That's there. I've got the Sydney workshop on Saturday, March 28th. So we're about a month and a half out. No, we're not. We're about 3 weeks away. Fuck, where am I? We're about 3 weeks away from that. That ticket link is down below. There's also some free links down below. One other thing I will say, I'm definitely looking to take on some more online coaching clients. So if you want help from me, I'd love to work with you. So if you think I'm the right fit for you, just send me a DM on Instagram. I'd be more than happy to chat. I do have to set up that fucking landing page for online coaching. It's just getting pushed down and down the list. But I am looking for online clients at the moment. So if you are keen and want to get some help from me around these ideas, DM me. Another big update, just as we're recapping my life right now, it looks confirmation should be this week, but I should be out of this space first week of April. I'm officially closing this chapter of my career, which is the Warrigal Road chapter. Closed strength culture, obviously, and then still been working out of the facility, but moving on. We should have a tenant. All things look positive. We've just got to go through back and forth with the finer details of the contracts. And it looks like I've already got a new location. Might be a little bit of a transition period for me where I'll be at home a little bit, but also using some different offices in their space. But fingers crossed that all comes together in somewhat of the right time for me. But I will have a new gym that I'll be working from that is actually a gym, not an empty shell, which means I'll be able to offer some consulting one-on-ones. I will not be offering regular one-on-ones, but definitely some consulting one-on-ones. I can definitely go through and do some of those things. So that's coming as well. And the final thing would be one-on-one mentoring is always open. I fucking love one-on-one mentoring. If you want to dive deep with me on any of this stuff, movement, programming, business, client management, whatever it needs to be, I'd love to jump in with you. So there's a link down there below as well. But we're at the end now. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week.